I must have printed extra copies when I tried 8 and it was. And I also have one on the peasant rebellion in the Holy Roman Empire in the 16th century. And I also have one on the condition of French peasants during the French Revolution. Yeah.
I was and so
I guess we all make choices. The rest of us chose to be. Don't get you one. I thought I gave you one, but I thought about it. That counts, right? Yeah. So, and so we got to trickle down. What was the flowering of African American culture in New York in the 20s? The Harlem Renaissance. And what was it called? African Americans moving north for the jobs? But they don't live in what kind of cities? Why? And what group formed? The Klan came back. And who became, conservatism. That conservative revival, it really meant that, or the idea of going back, culturally conservative means going back to what?
The way it should have been.
Yeah, the way it should have been, kind of this myth of the past. And what? No, well, don't forget, by March 22nd, you have to pay for the AP exam. But like I said, you give me 188. You give me 188, I'll get you the best seat in the place. The best seat, right in front, got cushions, a back. Yes.
For European conditions and alliance, this is just on our but is that talking about like just who was or what does that?
The alliance system, but also things like old monarchies, the 17th century monarchies, industrialization, imperialism, militarization, those things. And that will be one of your choices.
Okay.
The ones you have to answer, why the U.S. entered, and Trickle. And Herbert Hoover's slogan was a return to what? Not Hoover Harding. Normalcy, which really ties into that kind of go back. Isn't it interesting how politics change? Sometimes the slogans will be looking forward, like Kennedy was a new frontier, and then we'll have a looking back one. Let's go back to the way. So Kennedy was very liberal, looking forward. He's more conservative, looking back. And people have elements of both, I would argue. I imagine you do too, right? Don't you look back to those heady days? Don't you miss 7th grade? I'm kidding. And who was the Secretary of the Treasury for all these Republicans in this era? The Pennsylvania Mellon, that's Andrew Mellon. And Al Smith Locke, the answer was anti-what bias? But also, what hurt him probably? Yeah, that voice, because of the radio. Think how much image is going to matter more and more. You saw little bits. And think about today, how much image matters and how people can paint a certain image. So, let's get to trickle down. We have wealthy on top. And that is the idea of it, wealthy. And we want to get money in their hands. This is right where we quit?
Yeah. Correct.
And so that is where government comes in. Government has a huge role by setting the rules, setting the values. So I'll draw you a table. What we're doing is right here is a list of all the ways that government will try to get more money to flow in the hands of the very wealthy. And this is a redistributive policy to redistribute wealth from working people to the top, with the idea then that the money will trickle back down to the working people. So most economic policy redistributes wealth. This does it bottom to top, with the idea that the policy itself will vote everybody else with a more even prosperity. So let's talk about government. I got to make sure I'm filming this. It is filming. So, government. And so it's specific policy. And so the number one thing are tax cuts. Keep taxes low for the very wealthy. And what do we call it? Where ideally, in a trickle-down system, working people would pay a greater percentage of their income than the wealthy. That's regressive. So a regressive tax code, or at least not as progressive. So things like emphasize sales taxes or tariffs over taxes on capital gains. You know what capital gains are? Money you make from the sale of like stock or real estate.
So they make tax cuts for,
Very wealthy.
okay.
The highest marginal income tax rate, well, let me get to this real quick. There would be 2 tax cuts. Mellon would personally write 24 and 26, the biggie in 26. Massive tax cuts.
The years?
Yeah, the years. The highest marginal income tax rate went from 74% down to 24. Now, nobody paid 74% of their income in taxes. That's not the way marginal income taxes work. I'll show you exactly when we get to the New Deal. You know, it sets up better there. Yeah, 74 what? 24. Mellon himself got a tax cut of $800,000. That's about $12 million today. Yeah, he wrote the bill, and yes, his opponents would say he wrote it to give himself a big tax cut and justify it with this policy. But he would argue, no, I just happen to be somebody who knows how to make money, so I should have more money. I'm the one who knows how to make rational decisions to help the economy. That would be his argument, just like the argument today. That's almost exactly what, well, President Trump originally said he would get a tax increase, but later acknowledged he'd get a big tax cut, and that's basically what he said. We don't know how much he would get. No one knows how much money he has. 60 million to 100 million probably a year. So, but we don't know for sure. But tax cuts. It's in fact always tax cuts. Lower taxes, especially on the wealthy. Now there's a reason for this. Next, deregulation. Get rid of government regulation. Government regulation is a cost. So get rid of the cost. So what did the FDA regulate? Food safety. You don't enforce those rules, and what can companies do? Cut corners to lower costs. Now, also like the ICC regulated, you remember what the ICC regulated? Interstate commerce being specifically then what was it? Railroads. You don't enforce that, railroads can charge more for monopolies, make more money. Yeah. Get rid of government regulations, like the government regulatory bodies. Or don't enforce the rules. Just we're not going to enforce them. No. Eventually, things like in the New Deal, the SEC will regulate the stock market. We'll get to that a little bit later. And like beginning a little bit in the 30s, but really the late 60s into the 70s, we had environmental rules. If you don't enforce environmental rules, that cuts costs dramatically. Or write the rules for such that you can continue to pollute, cut costs. Or worker safety rules. Unsafe working conditions, lower costs. So don't enforce the rules. But the two biggie, no enforcement of antitrust. Don't enforce laws about trust is synonymous with what?
No.
So up until in the progressive era, from Roosevelt to Wilson, they pretty much enforced antitrust laws. As soon as Republicans got into power, well, more conservative Republicans, because Roosevelt was a progressive Republican, and Taft, same, they couldn't enforce these. There's going to be all these mergers, and the thing that if there's no antitrust, wealth can focus on top. More money for the very wealthy. They can set prices and set, or at least do more to set prices, not only for their raw materials, but also for the products they sell. And the big thing is, all of these, tax cuts do the same thing too, but here, they cut wages. They can cut wages. If there's a monopoly, the wages go down for everybody. Except for those who own. Remember, I mentioned this once before, but if there's a bunch of companies competing for workers, they bid wages up. If there's one company or two companies competing for workers, they set the price. You can really see it in, I just read an article, fast food industry does this, but in tech companies. I just read another article about that, how tech companies are just hammering wages of their programmers and people like that, because they set the wages. So, yes, they make more than somebody who works at McDonald's per se, but Their wages are still lower than what they could be if there's competition. This is, oh, and finance. Get rid of financial so no financial regulation. The big thing is they want easy credit. Let banks, make it easier for banks to loan money. If it's easier to borrow money, the idea was it would be easier to expand your company. It would be easier for people to buy their goods. It would be easier to invest in the stock market. It would be easier to speculate. Let the banks make risky loans. And if the banks go under, hey, that's just a bad business move. And the whole idea is to get more money out there. And so no rules or regulations. And there were very few in the 20s. They were pretty much non-existent by the end of the decade. And this is a big issue right now. Really big issue. I mean, wow, big issue. Even know why?
Because there are no financial.
No, there's actually a relatively strict one, but the Senate just voted yesterday and the House is going to agree. So it'll be signed into law in 3 days. A massive, a bill that would massively curtail regulations on banks. On banks. I mean, it's like one of those bills. Wow. In fact, the bill is such that the Congressional Budget Office, that they go and they call it scoring bills, but they look how effective the bills will be. They say that this bill will add dramatically to the government debt because it will dramatically increase the chance of financial panic and depression.
Get ready.
Wow. And you know what that meant? It's going to pass overwhelmingly in the House, and this president will sign it with it. No, you can make a lot of money. The goal is to put money in their hands. If that's the goal. It was relatively bipartisan. I think 17 Democrats and all Republicans voted for it. Yeah, that's a big deal. But the whole idea is make it easy to borrow money. Next, so we have deregulation, tax cuts. The next big one is anti-union. Remember, that's what the whole thing about the Red Scare was. If you have a Red Scare, the main target was unions. You break up unions, make it more difficult for workers to form it, put legal impediments in it to make it easier for companies to not recognize unions, and that drops wages. It drops wages not just for people in unions, but it drops wages for people outside of unions. Because companies, if unions are strong and a company doesn't want unions, because they'll lose a little bit of power, they will raise the workers' wages and benefits to keep unions out. So areas with strong unionization, wages are higher than areas with weaker unionization. And again, there are flaws in it, but that is just a simple, cut and dry truth about unions. You can see it in my profession. Yeah.
So then what are we doing to protect the
Well, in conservative economics, you don't want to protect them because that raises wages. And so, if you believe in conservative economics and unions are really weak, you should be happy. You should be happy wages are dropping. Of course, that might be your wages, so I guess you have to suck it up. But that's maybe facetious. So obviously, we'll get to the other approach would be to strengthen union, and we'll talk about the law when we get to the New Deal. Remember, these are, if this happens, these are good things if you believe in conservative economics. So, I'm not trying to say this is positive or negative. No, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh! Do you notice a tie-in, everything drops wages? Do you see a connection here? You keep wages low, more money here. Wages low, more money there. So, also, no inflation. So have monetary policy that will limit inflation. That's why they stayed on the gold standard back then. Today, that's what the Federal Reserve does. We'll talk more about that later on. Think about inflation. If there's moderate inflation, your wages are going up, prices might be going up, profits going up. But if you have wealth, if you have $1 million and you kept it in a jar in your backyard, that'd be a big jar, especially $1 million nickels. If there's inflation, what happens to the value of that $1 million in nickels? If there's inflation, the value drops because you can't buy as much. Deflation, the value goes up. Inflation. So that's why they don't want inflation. And we keep inflation's really low now. We have really low inflation.
So with no inflation, the value does.
If there's no inflation, your value either stays the same, or if there's low deflation, it goes up.
Okay.
So that is why they didn't want inflation.
So they want.
Yeah, or maybe not deflation, but just really low inflation. And then, and that keeps wages down. Also, no safety net. Anybody know what a safety net is? To catch people when they fall. Those are any kind of programs that will help people who have lost their jobs, people in depressed areas, there's no jobs for them to have. So help the poor, help working people, a safety net. And so no safety net, or as little one as possible. And the whole thing about this is, if you know that if you lose your job, you're going to starve. Your family's going to starve. You're out in the streets, you'll take whatever wage you can get. And that drops wages. And also, you have to pay for it. So that cuts taxes. So let me give you, yeah. So, no welfare. When I mean welfare for the poor or unemployed. Welfare is direct government aid. So like help with food, housing, direct money. Now, they like welfare, but the welfare's got to go here. You know, this is welfare, not to them. But the whole idea is, you know, they would burn it or they would demand higher wages. There's a morality thing here. And what else? What's the old age pension? No Social Security. Now, this requires taxes, but if people get near retirement age and they realize all I have to live on is Social Security, a tiny little bit, what are they going to do? Or if they don't even have anything to live on, what are they going to do? Keep working. What does that do to wages? It drops them. Because that means people are working longer, increases the supply of workers, and will cut wages for people just entering the workplace. So people like when you get out of high school or college, whenever you get your job. Yeah. And also makes them more desperate. This is actually a crisis today where almost half of all Americans don't have any retirement savings at all. So this is all they got. Well, especially when it's half of all people, and that includes old people like me, who are getting relatively close to retirement. I know I'm going to work till I'm 90, but maybe I will. But you see, a conservative proposal would be to cut of Social Security and raise the retirement age to make people work longer, which is what President Trump has proposed.
What is their retirement age?
Huh?
What is their retirement age?
You can start retiring at 62, but you don't get full Social Security until you're 67 now.
That's old.
Everything's relative, but yeah, when you start getting near that age, it doesn't seem quite as old, but I know what you mean. Yeah, it is. I mean, especially if you have a manual labor job, we're not going to be that much longer. So it's a big deal. Next, and I'll talk about Social Security when we get to the New Deal. No health care. If there's some kind of national health care, which is a government program, workers aren't as desperate. Right now, in the United States, which is the only industrialized country that does not allow for healthcare, think about what a big deal that is. It's really tough. If you got a job you hate or the pay's low and various number of things, it's hard to say, I'm going to leave and go to another job or start my own business when if you have kids and you got, kids tend to get sick. I know. Terrible. Or you might get sick, or your parents might get sick. And by the way, it's a big thing too. If there's no Social Security, you got to pay for your parents. They move in with you. That was the retirement before Social Security. But it's a big deal. But if you have health care, you can say, I'm going to go look for another job, or I'm going to start my own business. It's really hard to start your own business because you don't get health care. I mean, it's a lot different. You go to a place like Canada, there's a lot more small businesses there than here. It's declining here because of those issues, because of the desperation. A few more things here. No education. No aid for education, or limited. So if you go out of high school with very few options, lower wages. Or if you come out of college with a lot of debt because college is so expensive because there's no government aid, you got to accept the first job you get, right? Because you got to pay back that debt. And that's the reality. So what does that mean? You got to take what you can get and take whatever wage you get. And that really limits your options.
And have those school loans.
Well, that's a very interesting part of American law. Yeah, you can't go bankrupt and you pay a lot higher interest. It's a very interesting thing. So these are all, now remember, so if you believe in conservative economics, you want, this is good if you get rid of all of this. This is good. That's a victory. And so that's part of the reason why the attacks on healthcare we saw in the last year. That's why. It's economically, that is the reason. So, a couple of things here. We can go through more, but those are the biggie. And now, it puts money in their hands. But you notice everyone drives wages down. So you see what the big thing is? Just jot that down, wages. If wages are low, the rest of it works out. So, with this, the idea is these people understand the economy. They're smarter and also morally better because they have money. So, that means, they haven't made terrible mistakes. And so they will take this money, make the very rational decision of invest in, here's the biggie. The philosophy is capital. They will buy machines, research and development, build factories, or whatever the production you're going to do, whatever business. But they'll make these rational decisions and make it. Once they realize that they won't have to worry about regulations, they'll always have credit, wages won't go up, they'll be able to profit more from it, they will invest in capital, make factories. So what we're going to do is, here's the biggie. We will increase supply. And from that, eventually, once you increase supplies, what are you going to need? If you build this factory, what do you need? Workers. And that's where you get workers. And now the workers have money, which means what are they going to do with that money? And that's the demand. And here's the engine of trickle-down economics. If you keep funneling money into them, it will eventually create this engine of more demand here. And where will they buy the goods from? Right there. And that is the engine of trickle-down economics. And so the big thing we got to get is this. If we help the supply, it creates demand. Supply creates demand. There's an economic law from a French philosopher, so it's called Say's law. That's what it is. Supply creates demand. And that's why you see trickle-down economics called supply side. Supply side economics is trickle-down. By the way, then what would liberal economics emphasize? Demand. It's named after an English philosopher or English economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes, so it's called Keynes. We'll get to that a little bit later. So, right here. Sound good? And there was economic growth, and did it work? Well, it worked in one way. The wealth of the top 1% went from about 40% of total wealth to 55% of total wealth in that decade. So they got really rich. Now, the idea was they're going to make rational decisions and build things, but there was production. But I think you might see a problem right away. Do you remember the boom-bust cycle? So we have a boom, and it starts going to the bust. And what's the first thing? Don't we have oversupply right here? We'll get to speculation in a second. This policy leads to overproduction. And also, if wages are constantly being forced down, if workers get jobs but their wages are stagnant, how do they afford to buy these things? So what do? Debt always goes up. Not only, and debt's easier now because the banks are loaning like mad, right? Can you imagine the consumer debt being bigger than the size of the entire economy? That happened in 1929. It would happen again in 2008. It's going up. It's about 85.
Oh,
It's a ticking time bomb, potentially. And here's another really big one. Do they have to? No. Couldn't it take this money and build a mansion buy a 50,000 gold collar for every day of the week for their poodle. A gold twist and use dollar bills as toilet paper? Do they have to make, are people rational and always make rational decisions?
No.
Or, here's the biggie, somebody said this. Andrew Mellon got $800,000. If he did, think about it, is he gonna take the risk and start a factory? Or is he just gonna go around and say, hey, I have $800,000, I'm just gonna hire people to be my flackies until I run out of money? Is that what you do when you get after 20? You just hire someone to follow you around until you run out of money? Making money is difficult. Wouldn't it be great to make money without work? More and more of this money, after every tax cut, gets funneled off into speculation. The first area of speculation was actually real estate. In 2026 and 27, right after, you saw the same thing in 2003 in the United States. Florida. Think about why Florida would be such a big deal. Before the 1920s, nobody lived there, but electricity and air conditioning, you can get away from cold New York and go down to Florida. And soon, all the dry land you could build on was sold. And what's the price of that land? What do you think happened once people started buying it? So people started buying land. So up north, they would buy land from Florida sight unseen. Because they're just printing money. It tripled in price in 26 and 27. Wait a minute, sight unseen? People started buying what? Swamps. That's a bubble, where the price got bigger than the actual value. What happened when people realized they're buying swamps? And that's where we get, it actually really hurt banks, but in desperation to make more money, we get the largest bull market in history up to that time. Bull market is a what? What do we call bull market is a what? What market? The stock market. A growing stock market. That's why right in front of Wall Street, someone has a joke, put a gold bull. It was meant to be a joke to mock them, and now it's like when people get posed next to the bull at Wall Street. Wait. So, that's the system of 20 that would be out this. But what's going to happen is, there's going to be a lot of debt. Wealth will focus, but I have to add this one more quick thing. What group is going to be hurt the worst as demand drops in, or wages drop and wealth seems to go to the top? The middle class. Remember, farmers are always in debt, prices are low, and this is going to hammer them. Okay. Oh, we covered a lot today.
It's very applicable.
Oh yeah, this is.
I wish all of school was applicable. I kind of got confused with it.
Yeah. So what do we do is do the outline for me. And why don't you do this? Rewrite the whole story. You got that. Read it, not a big deal.
Thank you. Like, I
You need three. Let's just talk about that now. You'll get it. It's not a big deal. It's your first one. Don't worry. It's money well spent that video. The red's here. Sound good? Yes. No, it wasn't really, even though it did relate in a way. But the big thing about this was, it was first off, was this weird. You're like, gold. You just have paper. What does that mean? Gold. But also, the gold standard by definition, just because there's a limited amount of gold, it kept the value of the money high when money supply. And so, even though it's going to have, they were thinking in that way, but in the short run, the problem is that you keep inflation.
You need Okay.
So the
I
gold
already-
standard actually makes and all you gotta do is look at it. It's zero hours,
I'm not wrong. You're not.
He's not wrong.
right?
I was like, I can't even, I was like, there's so off that I was like, oh, I should probably tell you.
Yeah, gold standard causes
I
the
noticed there, I saw you.
I didn't even think about that. I was like, it's not on.
So are those permanent tattoos or anything? I don't think so. You'll be there for the next
Well, I have Zimmerman know. So,
So.
You just
yeah, it's just not.
Okay.
I really thought I started. So, thank you for telling me. Yeah, that's good. Does it itch or anything?
Oh, so bad. Right off. Right off.
I wanted you to do this. I'll do it.
Hey, can we get pictures together doing the Charlie signals?
What happened? Sure. Oh, because you're, yes, of course. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's great. So, this is dress up day. It is an assignment. What? At least they're safe and uncontaminated by wearing.
Oh my God.
What happened? What? Huh?
Is it the 18th or the 19th?
Quick. I like the sash.
It's a tobacco.
Now, for those of you who did not dress up, I'll give you one more chance to get partial credit, or you do an alternative assignment, which I've already talked to. And now I'm expecting a lot out of this. What are you going to make for us? 1920 style pizza.
New York style.
New York style. And so the only toppings they had in New York in the 1920s is time to rub, turnips, and beets, right? So it's turnip sauce and grass.
Yes.
No, we'll get the, actually by the 1920s it was that's in New York, because that's where the first pizza places were. In the US, that would be all Napoleon. Neapolitan. So
It's like bread and like a lot of sauce and like
mozzarella
a little bit of cheese. Yeah.
and
olive oil.
basil.
It's-
So you'd have pesto.
Yeah.
Pesto or basil. Which, pretty good pizza. I like it. That's one of my favorites. Okay, so I'm just hacking now. I do like the Panama hat. So for those of you who did not dress, you will have to make that up or something else. Oh. Perfect shoes for the 18th Amendment.
Yeah.
And we're against the 18th Amendment?
No.
Oh, I saw that.
Against
Good, I like the sandwich board. So we're gonna give Jake just 1 second, and then, so let me get a couple announcements. We're kind of supposed to, but I don't like it. But I do like the hat. Is that your cigar? Very good.
I can't bring tobacco to school, believe it or not.
Somebody would frown.
I thought you were right to your rabbit.
It's really tiny.
Yeah, I thought.
Joe?
Yes.
It's very tiny.
You know, certain patterns do not go well together.
Oh, come on.
There,
That's a
yeah,
look.
that is a style, that's for sure. So, a quick announcement. So, papers will be due next Tuesday. We'll start the presentations then. So we'll decide on Friday who's gonna go. We will work again tomorrow. We will meet in the library tomorrow. But then on Friday, we start Jonestown. Maybe we'll start Jonestown tomorrow.
About Friday. I'm not gonna be here tomorrow.
Hayden.
Let me think, I'm trying to think of the best day to get this to work. So that's a plan for that, and then we'll do the presentation for the rest of the week, and then the week before spring break will be Manson. So we'll do Manson, I'll talk a little bit about his life, and then I couldn't decide what to show, but I do have such a great movie on Manson. It's so good, Helter Skelter. I mean, it's like shockingly good. And so, oh, another Panama hat. All right, so I was waiting for Jake. Let's get everyone to dress up. The cool people up front. That includes me and not some of you. Now, you know they had collars for reasons. By the way, you would have paper collars. You ever seen the paper collars? You'd have a shirt with no collars, and you'd have disposable paper collars you could stick in, so you can throw them away. Are they trying to shirt waist? But that's shirt. That was a shirt with the collar of the shirt.
I know.
Because the idea, okay, let's go this way. Don't get sit out the door.
Yeah, you'll be sleeping with the fishes tonight.
Huh? Bow tie, yeah, let's do it. So let's start right here. Who are we?
The 18th Amendment, which is prohibition.
So we're going as the 18th Amendment.
Yes.
How does the hat relate to that?
It was a popular hat.
Very good. And then we have.
I'm a guy who loves the seagulls. Living my life lavishly.
He's not wrong. No, that's good. It's very kind of 40s, yeah. And then we have.
George Machine Gun Kelly.
And you like the.
This time is just.
I like it. And then.
I'm supposed to be Mad Dog's home. I can see it.
Yeah, that works. The hat ties it all together. And then we have.
1940s fashion is
Not quite big enough hat, but it's good. Sorry for coughing again. And then followed by. And what's on your hat?
It says San Diego. It's not mine, but
Is that like a San Diego Padre hat or something? Okay. He was a big Padre fan. They were part of the Pacific Coast League. You should know that. And then, yes, and you have to wear those the rest of the week. I bet you have to take that off as soon as we're done. And then we have
generic 1920s.
guy with a carrot. Naturally. Racketeer Rabbit. Yeah, that's exactly. Somebody should be dressed as Buzz. Hit him again. Delaney?
Hit me again.
Ma Barker.
Very good. I like that.
Pearl Elliott.
And we have Pearl Elliott. You look far too respectable. No, she actually dressed very respectable.
And then I'm the 18th and the 21st.
Oh.
I wonder if that.
Yeah, we didn't have the amendment repealing prohibition.
I'm just glad, I guess. I don't really know who I am.
Yeah, I can see that. But I like the mustache. Very good.
I'm Big Jim.
Huh?
I'm Big Jim.
He's such a good guy. That mustache is really, it really ties everything together. And then,
Tommy Lee Jones.
and why this?
Because he lost his 2 fingers in a industrial accident.
See, and that's the kind of method acting we like. She got rid of her 2 fingers for this role. Somebody wants, I think you might even get a B out of this. And then,
I'm just a flapper.
just a flapper. Very good. So we have some generic and some, and then finally,
Dillinger.
which one? Just Dillinger. John Dillinger.
Yeah.
Yeah, do the.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's scoot together. We had to get a picture of this crew.
How you gonna do it?
Yeah. Well, I'll compare yours to mine, okay?
Watch out.
I'll have to send it to you.
Your head reads.
Oh, and then I get to go to the dance.
It's these 9 inches.
That's part of what it's saying.
More 9-inch heels.
In front of my camera. My brother is in China, and he must be bored because he sent me 30 texts. Actually, I got 12 new texts from him the last half hour. So now everyone get in character?
I don't know what.
Thank you for sharing. Now point at the person who disappointed you the most in this class. You notice no one pointed at me. They were you.
I was definitely.
All right, good job. Nice job, students.
It's okay.
Mr. Cooney stayed at Trump International Hotel and Tower in Panama.
I know. No. I learned about that and I was really disappointed.
And then, oh, check it, Kurt, on. That one turned out really well. Mine didn't turn out. I always have trouble with the camera. I want to shake my phone too much. You guys, I get nervous.
Whatever the camera has over.
But they closed it down with Trump International Tower. He didn't pay his Trump. Okay, so we will start on. Let's start on Tuesday with the presentations. So we'll come in class, but think about two things about. First off, who would want to go first? Those of you who did not dress will have the first choice of when to go. No, I'm sorry, I lied. Those of you who dress will have the first choice of when to go. That's your little reward, besides slightly higher grade. Sound good? And don't take that off. It's off! I bet those are just, where'd you get those?
Oh, it's just glue and like tissue paper, the eyeliner.
That's really gross.
Thanks.
Yeah, and well, this compared to your what you do, Claire Barton last year. Oh no! Bonnie, that was good. All right, so that's what we're gonna do. But we're gonna do this. Then I want everyone to be quiet, grab all your stuff. We're gonna go up to the library and do a research day tomorrow. You gotta walk to the halls with the 18th Amendment, and you take it off and do that. I love the hat. So those of you who are gone, you want to talk to me about what you're going to do. Emma already has. Put the hat back on. Ooh, and it's camo so they can't see your head. I'm glad you. That's really clever. I like that. Huh? No. When you're a method actor.